everyone, and welcome to this show. And today I am delighted and honoured to have with me Rob Hopkins, who's the co-founder of an incredible movement called the Transition Network Organisation. And before I hand over to him to explain a little bit more about it, here's just a few little facts about it. It's nothing to do with technology, and it's everything to do with inspiring locals to do regenerative activities or projects within their own communities. And it started back in 2005 in a small town in Devon called Totnes, where Rob still lives. And since then, it's grown, it's spread across 50 countries around the world on every continent, except possibly the exception of Antarctica. And it's got about 1,000 transition groups operating in all sorts of communities around the world. So it's absolutely flourishing. And I came across them by accident. So I've been doing regenerative research for the last sort of 18 months. And a local bread company called the Handmade Bakery mentioned the transition organization to me and explained to me that the catalytic impact they'd had on the town of Slough in West Yorkshire in England. And I thought, well, this sounds really interesting. So I got in touch with Rob, and he very kindly and generously agreed to come on the show and answer some of the questions that I have for him and share those answers with yourselves. So welcome, Rob.
Greetings. Hello. Lovely to be here. Yes, and thank you for pronouncing Totnes properly. It's always a bone of contention. People always pronounce it Totnes, like Loch Ness, and it's Totnes. Like,
well, that was lucky then, because it was 50-50 with me.
Yeah, you did that, and you pronounced Slough properly.
Yeah, well, that's closer to me. Yeah, well, it's only about 6 miles away. And what a difference. I mean, I hadn't been there before this year for maybe a decade or so. And to my mind, it was a fairly sort of bland old mill town, not much going on, dead as a doorknob. But we get the bread from the Handmade Bakery delivered in home Firth. And so I looked up their website to see what they were about. And I thought, how amazing. They're a workers' cooperative, and they started out and were financed by the local community with bread bonds, which I thought was such an innovative idea. So I went. It is. So I went to see them, and I wrote a first draft. And the two of the original workers, Alison and Paul, said, "No, it wasn't quite as bad as you're painting the town, because there's been this transition town organization, yours, which have actually sort of seeded the idea of communities getting involved in their community. And that created the atmosphere, I think, for the investment they got." So I thought, brilliant, wonderful stuff. So anyway, you're here now. And what I'd like to do, I've got a few questions, and just to make sure that I cover them properly, I'm going to turn away for a second and have a look. Yes, first one. What's your background before you got even into setting up this organization?
What's my background? Well, I didn't do very well at school.
That's a good start.
I went to art college, which I loved, did foundation. Then I spent a couple of years off and traveling up. I lived in Italy for 3 years
beautiful.
in a Buddhist monastery up in the hills, which was just a life-transforming experience. Then I had about 2 years traveling around in India and Pakistan and trying to go to Tibet. And then I kind of lived in Bristol. And so when I was away, I found out this word about permaculture, which is this sort of sustainable design system model on how nature works. And I got deeply inspired by this model idea, and then I studied a permaculture training, and then I did one of the very first degrees in sustainability that existed at that time at UE in Bristol. And then when I finished that in 1996 with my wife and my two kids, we moved to Ireland and then spent 10 years living in Ireland, just putting all this stuff into practice. So I set up the first 2-year permaculture course at a college in Kinsale.
I'm glad I asked this question. This is fascinating.
We set up one of the very first kind of eco-village projects in Ireland, which still exists, which is called the Hollies Centre for Practical Sustainability, and we did a lot of work on natural building, lots of cob building and straw bale building and clay plasters, and lots of training around that. And in 2005, we moved back to the UK and we came to Totnes, and we just started this process that for the first year wasn't even called transition. It was just a bunch of us trying to figure out, well, what would a community-led bottom-up response to the climate emergency look like? How would that be? And then we officially launched it in September 2006 with something that we called the official unleashing of Transition Town Totnes. And within 6 months of that,
Brilliant.
There was so much interest in what we were doing from all around the world that we had to set up another organization called Transition Network to support this movement as it spread, as you said, rapidly around the world. And so for the last 15 years or so, my work has really been with Transition Network, supporting it, looking for the stories that are coming out of this movement and amplifying those through books and things. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been focusing. I wrote a book called From What Is to What If about imagination, and my work has been really around that and designing trainings and trying to increase the imaginative capacity of people and organizations.
Oh, wow. Did you ever come across a guy called Otto Scharmer?
I met Otto Scharmer 2 years ago in Paris at the Change Now summit, and I ran until a few months ago. I ran a podcast series called From What If to What Next, and we did 100 episodes, and I ended it on 100 episodes because I needed to finish writing a book that I was writing, and finding 2 guests every 2 weeks for a podcast was rather time consuming, and I liked the idea of just doing 100 of something. It felt like a nice complete thing. And I met Otto Scharmer, and we did a live episode recorded with him at Change Now Festival. Very interesting man.
Yeah, because I came across him a year ago. I didn't meet him personally, but he had an online course on this Theory U and sort of being pulled by the future, as it were, or the emerging future, or leadership from the emerging future, and that struck a chord with me at the time, and it also made me think. I bet it seems to run parallel to some of the stuff that you've been doing as well.
I think there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similarities. I think there's this. So the writer Bell Hooks once said, "What we cannot imagine cannot come into being," and so I think there's various people who are really working on this thing of, well, how do we help people to really imagine what the future could be like? And actually, for me, the people I take the most inspiration from who are doing that work at the moment are people like Adrienne Marie Brown and Walida Imarisha and Ruha Benjamin, and mostly Black women living in the US, actually, who are doing phenomenal work around the application of imagination and building that up. So so I'm always looking out for people who are doing that kind of work, and he's one of them.
That's fascinating. And I noticed in your website, by the way, is extremely informative. And I looked through all the, these are the things you should be doing. And I think one of the things that popped out right at the top was that there needs to be this collective vision before you can really get moving with a project. So from your experience, how do these projects start?
Well, they usually start because someone has heard of it somewhere. Somebody gets the bug. Somebody gets excited. Maybe they have a friend who's already in a place that is already a transition place. Maybe they've been to visit one. Maybe they've read something. Maybe they've seen a film about it. But some kind of a seed lands where they think, maybe we should. I wonder if that would work here. Do you think it would work here? And then they start talking to some friends and other people, and they put together a kind of yeah, there's like an invitation goes out, like a call among people that they know, and then maybe they might put on an event, maybe they might screen a film about transition, maybe they might put on a big meal or something to invite people to say, or maybe they might invite someone from a transition group next door to come and give a talk about what they're doing and how it works and what they've been doing. So it kind of spreads like that. It's not, I think people sometimes imagine that because we started this thing in Totnes, it was like, sitting in the boardroom of Coca-Cola saying, now we need to open a Brazil franchise and we'll put in little pins and little maps. Actually, the beautiful thing about transition is it is really like it's much more like how mycorrhizal networks spread. It just spreads. You can't follow it, and sometimes it'll go and move in ways you expect it to, and other times it just has its own life completely and just goes off in all kinds of different directions. And that's kind of what I love about it, really. It's kind of unpredictability. But it normally needs some really passionate advocates who are really excited about it. And what I love about it is it's a self-organizing thing.
Yeah.
It's if you're a control freak, trying to coordinate something like transition would drive you mad. You have to have a belief and a trust in people's capacity to do incredible things. And then our role really in Transition Network has been to sort of run alongside it going, that's brilliant, that's great, hey, have you seen what they're doing?
Keep
over
the enthusiasm
here?
going.
And sharing the stories. We always say it's free. You don't have to pay to become a transition group. The only commitment is that you share your stories back into that network. So it's like a movement of stories.
That's nice. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And as a network, and obviously a highly organic one, and I think you ran an evaluation of its impact in 2020 to 22, I think it was.
Yeah.
One of the phrases that came out, or terms that came out, or adjectives that came out, was myceliac, and that immediately. I kind of got it, because that's how trees talk to each other underneath the ground and feed each other and do all sorts of magical things. And it is so organic, as opposed to when you normally think in certainly on the business side, you think in terms of ecosystems. It's more like supply chains, and it's all very in boxes, whereas clearly this isn't. Once people have got things going in their community on whatever little projects it might be to begin with, how do like local councils respond, or organizations like that, or do they get involved?
Well, before I answer that, just what you were saying before then, I remember years ago when transition had been going for a few years, I got invited to London by a group of successful business people who like to support interesting social innovators. They rang me up. They said, "You are a social entrepreneur." It was the first time I'd ever heard that expression before. I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And they said, "So we want you to come up to London and give us a 15-minute presentation about what you're doing. And then we'll ask you some questions. And then if we like what you're doing, then we'll support you in different ways." So I did my talk about transition. And then at the end, there was this long silence. And then this guy said, "So what you've done is create a very powerful brand and given it away for free to people all over the world that you have no control over at all." I said, "Yeah, that kind of nails it." He was like, "I can't, what?" It just did not register with him at all. But that's kind of why it works. So local authorities. So when we look across this movement in many different countries around the world, in some places like where I live in Totnes, until very recently, we had a local authority who were really not that interested. Most of the things that we did were kind of in spite of them, or just because we did them. We didn't get any support in particular from the local authority. In some other places I visit, I get invited by the local authority who are really excited about the transition idea. Like, for example, the city of Grenoble in France, which is a very difficult place for an English person to say. In Grenoble, the mayor there, he said to me, we love transition. We see ourselves as being a transition municipality, but we have no transition groups in our city. What should we do? Wow. And then in the best kind of places, what you have is a very active transition group, and a very active municipality working together really, really well. And that's really exciting. When local authorities see their role as being to create what I always call like an enabling infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you are a community organization and you want to start an urban agriculture project, we've written policies for it. We have a dedicated urban agriculture officer. We have grants. We have things to streamline. If you need to get planning for anything, we've made it much easier. If you want to do community-led housing, where the community becomes a housing developer, we have policies on that. We have a housing officer to help you. We have grants at different stages along the way. Then it's really, really exciting. There's not many places where that happens, but there are some.
Do you think that, I mean, obviously we've just gone through an election here, and now we've got a change of government, which appears to be wanting to put more responsibility out to local governments and mayors and that sort of thing. Do you think that will give them the remit to engage with these kind of things more, or do you think it's irrelevant?
Well, I always feel like what needs to happen, given the urgency of the climate emergency, which is what underpins all of what we do, is like, I always say to people, if you're not regularly terrified about climate change, you're not paying attention. And this is something that needs to run through absolutely everything. And the level, the scale of ambition that we need is not coming. I mean, it's now in the UK much, much better than it was before under the previous administration. But my sense is that actually we need to flip the current power structure upside down, in that the role of national government is to make sure that local governments have everything they need in order to be able to most skillfully, creative and imaginatively deal with the climate emergency. They're properly resourced to do that, and the policies exist to support them. And then the role of those local authorities then is to make sure that local communities have the resources and everything they need in place. We need to flip this upside down, because actually what we've learned through transition, in Transition Network, we worked with an organization called the Economic Social Research Committee, which is a European organization, which is one of the organizations in the European Parliament who write what are called opinions. So when the European Parliament is considering writing policies, there are certain organizations who can put submissions that then help shape that policy. And the European Union had drafted something called the Climate Pact, which was how it was going to meet its climate targets. And we were working with this organization on their response to that. And what we said in that was, you can't do this without engaged communities. And if you're expecting those communities to just do all of this in their spare time, once they've got the kids to bed on a Wednesday evening with no resources, you're going to get a fraction of what's possible. What we see in the transition movement is that when transition groups are properly resourced and funded, they can do incredible stuff. In the city of Bath, for example, Bath and West Community Energy, which came out of Transition Bath and Transition Corsham and is a community-owned energy company, they've raised about £16 million now from local people and the local council for renewable energy in that city. We have transition groups who have created community-owned farms in the city of Liège in Belgium. The transition group there created a project called the Liège Food Belt, which is completely reimagining the food supply of that city, which has raised millions of euros from local people working very closely with the municipality. We could do like an 8-hour version of this podcast with me just telling stories of what communities are doing around the world, often with just funding that they've scrabbled together from different places. The power, there is a huge untapped power and potential with what communities can do, and we need to be doing everything we can to harness that.
And another observation, going back to Otto Scharmer, I mean, he was saying that they're kind of, there's the idea ultimately is to scale everything up so that the whole globe does it all. But the reality is the clock speeds are very, very different. So at the local level, you've got very rapid innovation taking place. And then it kind of gets slower the more it's sort of regional versus, certainly global. But nevertheless, they all need to be working. all of these need to be worked.
Yeah, and actually, I mentioned about Liège in Belgium. That the Liège food belt is called the Ceinture Alimentaire Liégeoise.
I tell you what, your French has improved.
Well, I spend a lot of time there because weirdly,
I thought you must have done.
I'm kind of better known in France than I am in the UK because of a film that came out there about 9 years ago. So I can still get lots of invitations to go there because of that. But what happened with that was that has now spread to 6 other cities in Belgium, and it's becoming kind of the new normal very quickly. This idea that as a municipality that has to provide food for schools, for universities, for hospitals, you could just give out a contract to like Serco or one of these massive companies that provide you that milk off loads and loads of public money and give rubbishy meals to people. Or you could put in place a new system where you're growing the food around the city, connecting it together. You're building biodiversity, you're creating more jobs for people, you've got healthier food, you have all of this. There's this amazing town in the south of France called Montsartou, who've created this new model where they produce, where in all the schools in that town, the food is 100% organic and 80% of it is grown in a market garden that the municipality started. Wow. And the kids come out and see the food being grown and get involved. Then they cook it fresh in the school. But the thing that's most interesting, and they've done lots of research about it, is the knock-on impact it has on the culture of the town. So they reckon now, after 5 years of this program running in all the schools, that across the wider community, people eat 27% less ultra-processed food, 23% less meat, a lot more local, a lot more organic produce. So when what people call the anchor institutions, the municipality, the schools, the hospitals, take steps that are bold and visionary. We've got so used to this idea that somehow we just have to move in small little incremental steps. Actually, what we see is when you move in bold steps that are designed to improve the lives of the majority of people in that place, then the culture starts to change in ways that you really didn't anticipate.
It's really sort of putting the soul into the community, isn't it? To a large extent. I mean, I guess I'm by nature a fairly cynical person because I've worked for corporations. So that gives you plenty of reason to be cynical. I've lived in cities, another good reason for being cynical, perhaps. But
you live in the UK, that's a good reason for being cynical.
And we are grey by nature, as is our weather normally. So there's a lot of negativity around. And I've often felt that, well, this is the way the world is, there's nothing I can do. And of course, that message hasn't been changed in terms of Joe or Jane public, I don't think. You've got these wonderful examples that you've been able to see and touch. But for your average person, they're oblivious of these things. And one of the messages that came out of your evaluation process, what it said was, one of your challenges is to get better at communicating these rich stories and getting them out to the public somehow. Yeah. And then this research I've been doing over the last 18 months, I've identified something like 60 global movements of different sorts, but frankly, all pointing in the same direction. But it's fragmented and there is no single voice. And I think it's not just your movement that has a challenge to get these stories out, but all of the movements need to get it out, because the neoliberal lot, the banks and the finance and the extractive organizations that are out there doing damage on a global scale, they've got the power and they speak with one voice, and they've got people like Trump, dare I say it. I mean, this is the sort of this is what you're really up against to bring this alive somehow, is to create some pull in the ordinary person, the ordinary folk, to believe that there's something that can happen, to really sort of flag wave in their local communities where something is happening, think, hey, I could get involved with that. Oh, what a brilliant idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that in this country, almost all of our media outlets are owned by billionaires, or have been co-opted by them in one way or another, makes it very hard for these stories to actually get
break
out.
through. Yeah.
And because I remember years ago, I don't fly. I stopped flying about 15 years ago. But the last trip I did, I went to the US. And I remember going there thinking, well, this is the country that produces a quarter of all the CO2 emissions in the world, and that nobody really is that bothered. Actually, everywhere I went, every town I went, every city I went, there were all these incredible things happening in community food projects, community energy projects, all these initiatives where people come together and support each other in really brilliant and kind of visionary ways. So actually, what I see is a real, I'm writing a book at the moment called How to Fall in Love with the Future, which will be coming out next year, which is really around this idea that we need to, this idea that you often find in environmental movements, that if we talk about collapse and extinction enough, people will get it and move, and it just doesn't work.
No.
And actually what we need to be doing
numbing.
is to be painting pictures of what's possible that are so delicious that it gives people something to run towards. So what I do in my work now, I saw this T-shirt this young woman was wearing at a Black Lives Matter protest in Washington. I think you used it on your advert for this episode, actually, which and it said, "I've been to the future, we won."
Oh yes, I love that. Sadly, it went up before I could put that up. So
I loved it so much. It gave me goosebumps, and it made me think, like, how different would our activism be if that's how we talked about it? We need this movement of movements to be the most seductive movement. And so when I do talks now, I don't say, so this is the problem and this is what we need to do, here are the solutions. I say to people, do you know what? I live in a town in the southwest of England where we've just built the world's first successful, fully functioning time machine. And we regularly take research trips to 2030. There are many different threads going off into the future to 2030. And believe me, some of them are absolutely hideous and you do not want to go there. But there are some of those threads, the ones that resulted from us doing everything we could possibly have done, that lead us to futures that are so exquisite and delicious and extraordinary and exhilarating, that I'm going to tell you about it. And then I show them pictures that I've taken of places I've visited that already look like the future needs to look like, whether that's car-free neighborhoods in Germany, the bicycle rush hours in Utrecht in Holland, ecological buildings in Barcelona. But I share them all as if, like, I've just got back and wow, look at this and look. And it touches people in a way that I haven't seen before. It feels to me like the thing that we need to be doing is not giving people as much information as we can give them. What we need to be doing is to be cultivating longing. Longing is the most profound. It's like in Alice in Wonderland, where she's looking through the little door into the garden and she wants to get into that most beautiful garden she's ever seen, and she wants more than anything to be in that garden, but she's too big and she can't get in. That's kind of where we are right now.
No, that's a lovely analogy.
And we need to be painting pictures of that. And so who are the people in our culture who create longing? Is it climate scientists? Not really.
Storytellers.
Is it engineers? No. Is it climate activists? Occasionally. Exactly. It's storytellers, it's street artists, it's poets, it's musicians, it's artists of all hues and colors. And we need to get so much better at cultivating longing in how we talk about the future. And so for me, what's so powerful about the transition movement is that now nobody can say, yeah, like that's never going to work, because I can say, yeah, actually, do you know what? That works in Liège. Yeah, actually, that works in Worthing. That works in Wellington. We can see all of the pieces that we need, and they all work. What we need is to cultivate the longing for it at scale.
So, have you thought of changing your surname to Hopkins?
Well, I did. We started a brewery in my town, and I wondered whether Hopkins might be, because my family where my ancestors were known as the kings of the hops. They grew the best hops.
Actually, well,
it doesn't mean that at all.
That's a heritage and a half.
It just means someone who was related to somebody called Hob, which is really not very exciting.
Oh well, never mind.
So I like to go with. I like yours. I think
Hopkins is definitely, and also kin. You see, it's we're all in it together.
It works on many levels, Jeremy.
It does, doesn't it? So there you go. There's a free bit of PR for you. Oh, well, that's one fun. I look forward to reading your book when it comes out. I'm hoping to write a book as well, but I just get stuck in the weeds of research. But I don't have your lovely stories. So don't worry, I won't be jumping ahead of you on that, that's for sure.
When you have the stories, they write themselves.
Well, and what kicked it off for me, what sparked it off for me, just briefly, is I went to India in February last year. In fact, Brent was there as well. Courtesy of Zoho, a software company. And what they were doing was just phenomenal. And they talked about regenerative capitalism. So that's what we're about. We don't make profits for the sake of it. We make profits so we can do something with it. Yeah. And so they're building a hospital in Chennai. And they also flew us out to their, they've got a farm and a school out in rural, right out in the sticks. And they're looking to how they can create sort of life in these rural areas, which are so reliant on farming, which gets squeezed down by the middlemen and all that. So that it's feast or famine, or it's mostly famine. And they've got their own schools to bring people on, developing their own talent. So they're not relying on the market paying fighting for talent. They're creating the talent, and they've got artists. You'll be pleased to know they've got artists that they employ to paint these big pictures, and to imagine and to dream. And that's what inspired me. I thought, shit, they do exist. It's not just a grey world, And but I guess until I'd stumbled across your own movement, I'd kind of got the view that somehow big companies need to catch the bug if things are going to change. But actually, what I'm seeing at the local level in Slough, and that's all I've seen, is that actually you've got to tackle it from both ends, or inspire it from both ends, and have these examples. Rob, it's Rob Hopkins. Rob Hopkins, thank you so much for your time. Truly inspiring, and I look forward to reading your book when it comes out. And then
and also if people are interested, the last book that I wrote was called From What Is to What If: Unleashing the Imagination to Create the Future We Want, and you can available in all good bookshops.
Right,
and that'll bring you up to speed with a lot of what we've talked about.
That's fantastic, brilliant stuff, and keep going. It's wonderful.
You too. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Take care.